entertain us.
I know. Well, we're going to do our usual trivia questions. Well, first of all, hey, everybody. It's so happy to see people here. Claire.
Hey, Claire.
And so I'm going to be totally honest. I completely blanked on doing UVA trivia this week. Transparency. But I just thought of two quick C.S. Lewis trivia questions because Noah, who's here, recently wrote a really great article on, I'm sure to talk about this, but learning in wartime and different kind of themes around that, which is a really great piece from C.S. Lewis. So our first trivia question is, learning in wartime appears in kind of a collected book of C.S. Lewis's writings. Does anybody know the name of that book? I may be the only person who's read this. That's super fair. Yes, Sam! Sam got it. It's The Weight of Glory. It's great. I have it on my bookshelf right next to me. Big fan. And then our second C.S. Lewis question is, C.S. Lewis is kind of part of a group of writers, thinkers that had some pretty other big names in it. Does anybody know the name of that group of writers? Oh, and Sam's got it too. The Inklings, yes. And Sam, wow. Guys, you're really on it. Well, that's my trivia for tonight.
Okay, so well, I have to announce the prizes then. Hold on. I have to pick them out especially. So Sam you each get 2 pencils. Sam gets the monkey pencil. Can you see it?
Yeah.
And the watermelon pencil. And Isabel, was it Isabel? Yes, you get the froggy and the butterfly pencil. I will send them to you. Sam, you've already won once too. He's a winner.
Yeah. All
right, congratulations, everyone.
I also have to say, before I'll let Karen introduce Noah a little bit, but I hadn't actually read anything of Noah's until this week, and I think in the midst of just kind of our current cultural moment, that found what Noah had to say and some of the articles he's recently published really interesting and really encouraging. So I'm just really excited to hear from him tonight and chat with all of y'all about different themes that come up in his interesting articles. So Karen, you want to give us a little intro?
Yeah. So Noah, before I introduce you, I'll sort of introduce who's on the call. We have a couple, let's see, recent grads. That would be and there's Kenry. He's the old man. But Claire, who just graduated? Put up your hand. Oh yeah, class of 2020. And then Kenry is older. And then if you just finished your first year, raise your hand, or your first-ish year. Yeah, see? And then somewhere in between. Is there anybody else? And Kenry, what year did you finish, Kenry? He's walking, so he probably can't talk. When did you finish?
I'm not that old yet. I'm 2018.
Oh, okay, good. You're not that old. So Noah has come to us from Florida, but he lives in Wheaton, Illinois, or thereabouts. And he's a professor of urban studies and politics and international relations at Wheaton College, my alma mater. And he's the director of the Center for Urban Engagement and the director of the Equitas program, which I'd really like to hear about. And so I'm aware from reading his work that, he does talk about this article, The Weight of Glory, and learning in wartime with students with his fellows. So sort of from his own perspective and own conversations that he's had with students, really looking forward to hearing him talk about that. So whether you've had time to read his pieces or not, he's gonna kind of walk it through and then open it up a conversation. I know from my conversations with a number of you that, we have some really pressing concerns right now about how we can act in the world. What is our responsibility? What is our response? What do we carry? And what is our capacity to change the world? And how do we read somebody like C.S. Lewis at a time like this when we're lifting up so many other voices? Where does C.S. Lewis fit in? The old white British guy. So Noah, thank you so much for being with us. We're going to give it to you. And we have the chat box if y'all want to add questions or comments. I'm sure we'll have time, down the line to talk as well. So welcome, Noah.
Thank you, Karen, and thanks to Caroline as well for the kind words about the recent work that you read. First of all, thank you for having me here. It's wonderful to join all of you, to meet like this by Zoom. We're now getting a bit accustomed to it, and I guess we do call it actually meeting now because it seems like all we get to do. And so it's a lot of fun to join you this July and talk about vocation a bit. And I've also admired from afar Bonhoeffer House and the work of Theological Horizons, and I'm just really glad to have any touch point at all with what is going on there. And I think it's really a special initiative, and I'm grateful for those who make it happen. I have a lot to learn from what you all are doing there. So what I'm going to do tonight is I'm going to talk a bit about the articles that were sent to you ahead of time. Some of you may have read them, some of you may not have had a chance. So I'll walk you through some of them. I'll also give some bonus content so that those of you who did read ahead of time get something extra and not just a repetition of what's in there, and hopefully set up what could be sort of closing discussion, and love a chance to hear from all of you about questions you have and what you're thinking right now. As Karen pointed out, there are a lot of questions about what we can do, what we should do, what the current moment means for our sense of calling. And actually, that's exactly what I want to explore in the end. It's exactly how the paper that I originally sent along, the article is published in Comment, got started. So I'll say that, and this is the first bonus content, is a bit of the personal story of how this even got started. It came to me at a very weird time, vocationally speaking. I was actually closing the books on 15 months, probably the strangest 15 months of my entire career, and the pandemic was just beginning. So when people say, oh, this is strange, March to now, this has been strange, that's absolutely true. It has been strange. These are very unusual times. Before that, I was already, for other reasons that are not, don't have anything to do with global dynamics, don't have anything to do with a history of oppression in this country, which we're now dealing with up close and personal, a lot of us. I was already dealing with the fact that I had had over 15 months, 5 different occasions to reconsider my work one way or another. I'd had this sort of lurching 15 months moving from one request that I consider applying for some different job to another. 2 of those were at Wheaton College and 3 of them were elsewhere. 3 of those were in academia and 2 of them were not in academia. And so I was over and over being asked to think through, what am I going to do with my life now? At a point when most people think that I already know what I'm doing with my life, which is to say everybody but my dean thinks I know that. My dean knows that I have no idea. My dean is the one who asks me most often, what do you do again? And this is the person who really should know more than anybody else. And this was incredibly distracting, and I fell behind on literally everything I could fall behind on. And so what I mean by that, literally everything I could fall behind on, you can't fall behind on class. Class is when class is. You don't show up for class, you're not doing your job at all. But I mean everything else to which I'd committed. So a little bit of consulting work with an organization that wants to develop a program, in fact, not unlike Bonhoeffer House, alongside a historically Black college university in another part of the country. A local nonprofit wants to develop an undergraduate fellows program. So I was behind on my proposal to them. I was behind on writing projects. And it was actually, for various reasons, in mid-March, right before the pandemic really became clearly pandemic level, clearly about to shut down the country's economy, clearly about to put us in remote operations at Wheaton, that all that came to an end. All that uncertainty, in various ways, all came to an end right before the pandemic set on and we went to operations. And so I actually, for various reasons, felt sort of freed up. Like I sort of had the clearance to do all these projects that had been piling up, all the things I was late on and to which I'd committed. And in fact, all these ideas that came to me once I didn't have to worry about this question about what am I going to do next in my life. So here's a little bit of bonus content. I'll come right back to that point, so don't forget where we left off. But here's another bit of bonus content. You've probably done a lot of work on vocational discernment, whether you'd put it that way or not. Vocational exploration and discernment, figuring out maybe what your calling is. You probably have a lot of really sophisticated ways to think about that, and probably Bonhoeffer House has come alongside what you're doing and done that really well. But one of the things that's going on in higher ed right now is we are, I think, selling our students way short. We tell them that vocational discernment is about figuring out what you're going to do before you graduate. When in fact, in my life, vocational discernment and having some framework that worked for me over and over and over for decades, as I more or less get pinged with questions big and small. Do you want to come apply for this job? Do you want to leave that sector and work over here? Do you want to, for small questions, write this book or that book? Do you want to do this project or that project? That all falls into this category of vocational discernment. And I think I spent 15 months doing that in a heavier duty way than I ever expected to. And when that shut down, when I didn't need to worry about that lurching moment from one question to the next about what I might do next, I sort of a flurry of writing that came with that, a flurry of creative moments over several weeks where I was able to get a lot of things I'd promised out of the way, but a lot of new things too. And that's when this essay hit me, because just as I thought I was out of the weirdness, my personal weirdness, I was into the sort of global and national weirdness real fast. And I felt myself, and I could see others getting sucked into thinking all the time about the pandemic. So I had all these papers that were getting out that had nothing to do with the pandemic. And I felt myself getting sucked into spending a lot of time thinking about the pandemic instead of writing the next thing that's been on my list forever and is late to some editor. Or to a nonprofit that's wanting their proposal now since it was late. And I read a lot of other people who were working through this question. Some people asking questions like, well, does my work even matter now? Right? I'm not a first responder. I'm not a doctor. I'm not an infectious disease expert. I'm not a public health expert. I'm not a statistician. I do really think we need a lot of statisticians right now, and we need a lot of help understanding statistics and just being like numerate, right? We are having a real problem with numeracy. And we also need a lot of help understanding uncertainty. Statisticians can help us understand uncertainty. They can't help us understand what to do with it. But if we want to think sophisticatedly about it, like uncertainty actually means something, right? You can actually know a lot of times what the uncertainty means in terms of what you can know, can't know, what you do and don't know, what are the boundaries and things. We are so bad with uncertainty. I'm not a statistician. I'm okay with statistics. I'm not a statistician. I don't fall into any of the categories of people who can really lend an immediate hand in these circumstances. And so I understood these articles that were asking, what's my work mean? What do I do now? And I also saw some posts that were, I thought, right on, which, you know, one post I read said something like, this is a summary, the best art made during the pandemic won't be about the pandemic. I think that's probably true, right? It'll be sort of pandemic inflected, pandemic informed art, but a lot of the best art, when we look back on today, will be art that isn't necessarily circling around the pandemic, but it's informed by and stressed by the pandemic. Like the pandemic is a sort of forge in which it's made, but it's not about that. And as I thought about those things, it began to sound really familiar to me. It sounded familiar to me because over the past 2 years before this, I had taught students in our Equitas program in urban leadership C.S. Lewis's paper, Learning in Wartime. It was really a lecture. I call it a paper. It's an essay in the book, The Weight of Glory, collection, The Weight of Glory. But it was originally a 1939 lecture. And I give my students, I'll come back and tell you what's in Lewis's essay, but I give my students an assignment with Lewis's essay. I say they need to write their own version of learning in wartime. And what I want them to do is to explain to me why it is they would spend 4 years getting a liberal arts education, 4 years specifically at Wheaton College, getting a Christian liberal arts education, 4 years in the Equitas program in urban leadership, when all the challenges and issues and opportunities that drove them into our program in the first place are out there and need to be addressed right now. Right? This is the question that I have them answer. If you enrolled in our program, in the Equitas program in urban leadership, because you really are concerned with urban environmental justice issues, well, why spend 4 years doing that? Why would you be with us for 4 years and not be out there fixing that or addressing that or being alongside communities as they address it, learning with and from other communities that have already done that successfully? Why not? And what I asked them to do is model their approach after Lewis. So I knew the Lewis essay pretty well by now. Not only had I read it multiple times, including in recent years to teach it, but before that had read it multiple times. I had actually assigned it to students to read and assigned it to them to model essays after. And so I'd read their versions of it. So all of these questions really came home to me through a sort of Lewis lens. The question, why would we actually, why read Lewis now or why work with Lewis now is a good one. And maybe let's revisit that too at the end. I did have somebody say, as soon as they knew I had written this, it was the funniest thing in the world. It was almost predictable. They said, Noah, why would you write another essay using C.S. Lewis? Like, hasn't everybody done that? Don't we need to just hear from other voices by now? And it was a funny thing to ask me, only because I've asked other people this question myself. And I've never written a Lewis-related essay before. We have at Wheaton the Wade Center, which includes a lot of Lewis's work and original copies of things like notes, his desk where he wrote. Supposedly we have the wardrobe, although Westmont College also says they have the wardrobe, so it's a bit of a competition. And we also have all of Tolkien stuff, where we have the desk where Tolkien wrote his Fellowship of the Ring series and The Hobbit. And so there is this tendency at Wheaton sometimes to do too much inkling stuff. That's absolutely true. And nevertheless, I don't think I was actually a person who could be blamed for doing that, who could be rightly fingered for having that problem. And yet someone found a way to needle me about it. And so I had to wrestle with that a little bit too. We can come back. But Lewis's original essay was 1939. That's the original lecture, I should say. It was a lecture to his students. And he said the question they were asking was, why would we, while the world is burning, essentially, while Europe is descending into a regional war, becoming quickly a global war. In fact, I think this was, if I remember my dates correctly, this was roughly right after the Ethiopian War, which is one of the dimensions of sort of initial globalization of World War II and taking it outside the original European theater. So you've got the whole world descending into conflict. We're only 2 years before, I think, I wrote it in the essay, but I forget what it says, whether it's 41 or 43, the bombings of London. So the students he has are rightly worried that there are bigger things, bigger fish to fry than talking about beauty and truth in these abstract ways with my medieval philologist here, which is what Lewis was by profession and training originally. They were rightly worried that they or their friends and families would die there, even in England. And they were also rightly worried that they would be sent off to war and they would die in conflict. And they wondered, is there any reason to continue pursuing these studies right now? And Lewis has this just fascinating move. I think this is one of Lewis's best essays, as far as I can tell. And I'm not a Lewis scholar, so if some Lewis scholar tells you otherwise, that's great. But here's one of my favorites. And the reason is that he puts a twist on their question. Their question is, right now, the world is burning. Right now, I might die here. Right now, my family might die here. Right now, we might be sent off to conflict on the continent. Why would we keep studying? And Lewis says, well, why would you ever keep studying then? It's a really interesting move that he makes. He basically takes the immediate question, the momentary question, and he turns it into a perennial, if not eternal question. He says, why would you ever study? There have always been conflicts. There have always been wars. There have always been challenges like disease. There have always been, to speak of these sort of physical and social manifestations of challenges is one thing, but there's always been the spiritual challenge. He says there's always been the question of the eternal destiny of people who were engaged in studying and their neighbors. And if we have actually found reason to be out seeking beauty and truth in the midst of all that at any time, then we have our reason now. If it was good enough over and over throughout human history to actually pursue beauty and truth, or to pursue the study of them, then the beginnings of what became World War II were not occasions to simply drop that. And what he then goes into are three challenges. I think he calls them three challenges. At least I called them three challenges. One he calls excitement. The next he calls frustration. And the next he, I need to remember which one is it. It's in this essay. Fear. It's excitement, frustration, and fear. And he says the first one, excitement, is the tendency just to think all about the truly big deal that is unfolding around. He did not actually suggest that the conflict unfolding around everybody was not a big deal, but he did say excitement is this tendency to think all about it. I think I felt that during the pandemic. I'm not going to say everybody felt it, but I bet that a lot of people who are honest about it felt it. Doesn't mean everybody. There are some people who are, as Lewis puts it, superhuman in their ability to deal with distraction. Or maybe they're sort of superhuman in their ability to put their heads in the sand, and maybe an unhelpful way too. But I certainly felt excitement. Like, I want to know all about this. I want to crunch the numbers myself. Like I said, I may not be a statistician, but I do have some training in that area, and that would be really interesting to see, like, in the argument about masks, how much are masks going to really help? I can do that. I shouldn't probably do that. That's not my value added. But there have been moments when I've thought, I can model this. There are moments when I've thought, my job is now to write something about the pandemic. Forget all those other things that are already late, or that I've already been thinking about for 5 or 10 years, or that I'm actually an expert in. I'm going to write about the pandemic. Like, that's the kind of excitement that Lewis means. And he says that we have a way of dealing with this. We ought to essentially, this is paraphrasing, but keep our nose to the grindstone. It doesn't say it won't be distracting, but we need to deal with the distraction of this. And I think I credit Lewis with not claiming these things will be easy. So I just want to say that now before we even get into the other two challenges. He never says that it's going to be easy to deal with the distraction, but he says we should. So if we have our moments, I have my moments sitting at my desk when I should be doing all sorts of other things, and really I'm reading the 10th article about the pandemic I've read that day. That may not be the best use of my talents. That may not be the best use of my calling, the best way to live into my calling. But it is hard. He's not saying it isn't hard. It's hard to just quit that, put that behind us, and deal with the things that aren't pandemic related. But yet he thinks we're called to do that, and I would tend to agree. Frustration is the sense that the things we're doing that we've invested so much in will not get done, or they won't be quite as good. His students were actually saying, I might die. I'm actually here for 4 years. Who knows if I'm going to last 4 years here? Can it be worthy then? That's a good question, right? It's a good question in the pandemic. I could get COVID and die. People on this Zoom call have probably had it. My mother had COVID. My father was actually laid off from his job because of the economic downturn. So we've experienced both the distracting and frustrating aspects of this up close. And Lewis's answer to that is God gives you enough work for today. And that resonates with me for all sorts of reasons. When I was writing my dissertation, I actually had to get down to something like, today's job is to write those 3 pages, or to write that one section, or to write those paragraphs. Because if I tried to tell myself I was writing my dissertation that day, it wasn't going to happen. Because you're never writing your dissertation. You're writing something much smaller, much more concrete than that. And Lewis is taking a version of that and saying that applies to all of us. When we're frustrated, potentially, that our work may not get done, our job isn't to finish that thing 4 years out today. Our job is today to do today's work, tomorrow to do tomorrow's work, the next day to do the next day's work. And I think there's something to that as well. And then his final challenge he lists is fear, that we might actually just be paralyzed by fear. And of course, that's possible for all of us. It's not only the pandemic, it's not only injustice and social unrest unfolding around us. There are daily enough things to fear. Every one of you probably that's a student right now has grown up in a post 9/11 world, when we probably instilled more fear in our youth than we have for quite some time. Though I did grow up in California, jumping under desks to do drills both for earthquakes and for nuclear attacks. I'm not sure how it's going to help in the case of the latter, to duck under my desk and cover my neck, but I at least got it with the earthquakes. But we've managed in your lifetimes to amp up some fear. And we've also managed with things like climate change to give people anxiety-inducing, fear-inducing conversation all over the place and literally everywhere you turn. Somebody recently invented the term doom scrolling for one way to navigate Twitter, just to scroll through Twitter looking for the latest thing that portends doom. That's the saddest thing I can imagine. And yet I think I'm familiar with that. I'm not saying I've done it, but I think I know even up close what that would look like. Even though I don't think I've ever indulged in doom scrolling, I'm probably close. We probably know a lot of people who are. And C.S. Lewis says it's good to remember when we face fear the difference between the world that we live in and the new creation that God promises us. And I agree with that as well. And so I thought this was an incredibly helpful essay for me. That is, thinking back on Lewis's essay and what I had a chance to teach and interact with my students about was incredibly helpful for me, and might be incredibly helpful for others as we thought through vocation in the midst of the pandemic, or as I put it in the title, vocation in the midst of precedented uncertainty. And you'll get that if you read the piece and look at the opening paragraph. It's one headline after another about about the pandemic being unprecedented one way or another. Number of times people use unprecedented is, I think, unprecedented in this pandemic. So here's bonus content number 2 before I move on to the twist that's in the second piece that you were sent. Bonus content number 2 is that for me, this also relates to a moment in fall of 2016, November 2016. Now, when we think of November 2016, what's the first thing that comes to your minds?
Election.
The election, exactly. That's the first thing that comes to my mind. It's probably the first thing that comes to just about everybody's mind. I remember that at Wheaton, we have something called department chapel. So we have required chapel 3 times a week. And once per semester, departments host a chapel service, and they put it on. They decide what will happen in the service that day. And in our urban studies major, we have a small enough major, but growing, about 27 students right now, that we can have everybody over in faculty houses. So we have still held our department chapels in faculty homes. And on the Wednesday after the election was our department chapel. So everybody stayed up late at night on Tuesday or woke up early to the results on Wednesday morning, only to learn that Donald Trump had been elected president, and then came to department chapel. And without making any effort to stereotype majors at Wheaton or anywhere else, you can imagine that we in our urban studies major have worked quite a bit to consider the themes that would be of great importance to a lot of people who would not want to see the outcome that we had that Tuesday. We had some pretty between disappointed and devastated people in the room, and had to talk honestly about what this meant moving forward. We had to make a few adjustments to our chapel time that day, and I left immediately after chapel for Toronto, where I was giving a speech on Thursday night. I was giving a speech on Thursday night in Toronto. So I left immediately after chapel, flew to Toronto. I was there for 2 days. Every single joke was about whether I was deciding to stay in Canada. And that made also the opening lines of all the talks I gave really easy too. So they were very funny and yet not so funny at the same time. On the way back from the airport on Friday, I was driving from O'Hare to my house, and I wasn't very far from my house, maybe a mile and a half away. And I'm driving westbound on a street called Geneva, and there's a burning truck to my left against the curb. There's a truck with a cab, just a pickup truck. Literally, this thing is on fire. Everything under its hood is on fire. Everything in its cab is on fire. There's no people in it. But of course, everybody's slowing down to look at the burning truck. I slow down to look at the burning truck. And we can hear emergency vehicles in the distance. And what happened was that we all stopped, and then we all started moving again so that the emergency vehicles would be able to make their approach. And I heard something blow up in the burning truck. Luckily, it was not a large explosion, but it was an explosion. And I stepped on the gas instinctively in my car, and I hit the car in front of me really hard. I disabled that car. I disabled my own car, which had to be towed from the scene. So that when the emergency vehicles got there, they had the burning truck to deal with and 2 disabled cars, including my own, right in the middle of the street, all because I couldn't keep my eye on what I was doing. Now, the way that I think about this is actually as a metaphor for my sort of post-election world. where I could spend a lot of time staring at the burning truck that is our American political scene right now. Or I could actually get my work done and not disable other people's vehicles while I'm at it. Now, I'm going to put a twist on that right now. I haven't written the essay about that. I actually have been thinking all about the essay that I need to write about the burning truck moment. I probably have started it 5 times. But my problem with that essay is that it ends with this question about whether or not I should actually be looking at the burning truck. It ends with this question about whether or not I should just mind my business, or it ends with this question about whether or not I should stay in my lane, so to speak. And I don't believe that exactly. And so yet there's something there, right? Don't stare at the burning truck so much that you disable the vehicle in front of you, your own vehicle. You can't help, and you're actually preventing other people from helping too. It's a bit like Lewis's article that you should keep doing what you're doing. If what you were doing was worthy before the war, before the pandemic, it's still worthy of you doing it now. And yet there's something that is rightly disturbing about the status quo that the pandemic can reveal, that the war revealed, that the racial injustice and following social unrest reveals about who we are and what we're doing right now, that does sort of place a claim on. And I need to wrestle with that. I think we all need to wrestle with it. So the second article that I sent, this is the twist, is that I was actually uneasy with the Comment Magazine piece where I drew on Lewis. And it's not because I don't agree with what I wrote. It's because there's a deeper level of complexity that isn't fully explored there. But if it doesn't tug on us, we're doing it wrong. If we're not actually made uneasy and tugged by this deeper level of complexity, if we're okay and we take C.S. Lewis or me to mean the status quo is fine, then keep doing what you were doing, that's all you need to do, then we've got it wrong. And so that's what I wanted to touch on in the second piece, which is really one of my newsletters. I do these newsletters roughly once a week, although I don't do them while I'm on vacation. And my point there was that my own writing makes me uneasy. I think that's fine. If your writing makes you easy after 2,000 words, there's a problem with you being too easy with things. And I don't think the status quo is okay. So we have to examine, is the thing we were doing, even if it was it actually worthy? But to use Lewis's terms, was it actually worthy? Secondly, is it actually something we can turn to probing the injustices and fault lines around us that are highlighted by the pandemic or highlighted by the racial injustice and social unrest that we've seen? How can we turn the Lewis sort of steadiness toward probing and dismantling, when it requires it, the status quo? That's really my question. I don't have an answer for everybody on that. I have more of a question. And in that newsletter, I did end with some recommendations about places to go, people to read, people to listen to, which were subversive recommendations. That is, recommendations that help us to turn the situation around and look at it from the side of the people who have to die so that the system can go on, to quote Cardinal Arns of Sao Paulo. That's about it. That takes us through both the articles and all the bonus content. And now you know what I'm wrestling with. And I wonder briefly if that resonates with you. Maybe Caroline or Karen, you can confirm how much time we have left. I'm not sure how many minutes we've got.
Yeah, I'd say we have about 10 or 15 minutes. Max is going to do show and tell, so we got to leave room for Max, but we have until 9 and it's 8:41. So I would say, yeah, if you want to entertain comments, questions. I know from the the gallery view that we've got some people who have really incredible ideas and struggles and thoughts. So I would just invite y'all to unmute and speak up or chat. Can you see the chat box, Noah?
You know what? I can.
Okay. Just in case anything
there we
comes
go.
up there. Yeah, if you see it, you can just read it out.
Okay.
But yeah, we have, I'm going to say, let's give it 13 minutes.
I can start us off with a question. I don't exactly have an end to my question, so let me do this. But I think I'm really interested in what you're talking about, kind of in this critique, maybe not critique, maybe it's just like a more sensitive reading to some of Lewis's writing, in the sense that I did have a chance to read your articles beforehand, and I really enjoyed the kind of second response of these like subversive ideas to, I think sometimes in Learning in Wartime and some of Lewis's writing, there's almost like glorification of the normal, whatever that is, in a way that almost says that like the things happening in the world around us shouldn't distract us from like living our normal lives. Again, I'm using air quotes, like as we're called to do. And so I just wondered if you could like elaborate further on, like for me, I'm going through this like crazy period of transition because I just graduated college and I'm working right now, but my career path is kind of thrown off because of COVID. And so I think I'm really having to reconcile, like, I majored in architecture, and so this like path, this like course of study that I'm on, I think what I'm asking is like if you like have any examples or anybody from the group of like how to like keep on driving your car and looking at the burning car at the same time, because I'm just really bad at like, I feel like it's either or. Like I switch from side to side. Like I'm either like completely like, okay, well, this is the world. These are the events and like the tribulations of the world around me. And like, I need to focus on this as like part of loving my neighbor well. And I want to do that. And so I swing to that side of the pendulum. And then I'm like, I'm overwhelmed, or like, I don't have the resources to do this, or I'm not the correct person to do this. And so I swing back to the other side of my pendulum, which is like, well, I was trained to be an architect, so I'll just do that. And I feel like there's no like middle ground in that. So I don't really know where I was going with that, but just something I was thinking about in the context of.
It's a great question. Does anybody else resonate with that?
Yeah, I was gonna say, I am working full-time, and I was working full-time when sort of like the first week hit of uprisings about police brutality and racial injustice. And for like the first 2 weeks, I felt like my job, even though my career is like aimed toward like minimizing those disparities and working against the system we have in this country, it felt meaningless. Like I felt like I was just wasting 8 hours a day, and that I should be protesting or fundraising or something. And so Caroline, I totally relate to that.
Yeah, I spent a good bit of time both in Chicago and in Wheaton at various protests and demonstrations over the past few weeks. I guess the past 3 weeks I've been out of town twice. So right before that, I spent basically every weekend participating in protests and demonstrations, and a lot of the time in between talking about them with people or helping to organize parts of them. In fact, if you go to my newsletter, you can see the most recent one. I think it's still the most recent. Talks about an encounter with an Auschwitz survivor who came out at 97 years old to support a rally for racial justice in Wheaton. And I did not expect to meet her, and that's a fascinating story, I think, if you're interested in it. And so a lot of people are making these special efforts, right? The Joyce Wagner, this Auschwitz survivor, is 97. She had to have her daughter drive her around to participate in these rallies one way or another. She couldn't stand that long for them. And I don't know whether it was because she's at high risk of COVID, which is possible, or she's just 97. And when I'm 97, I should hope to be able to be driven around at all to participate in rallies. And that's that sort of extra effort you're talking about. Katie, is that your name? Yes, Katie, you're talking about, you know, doing this extra work there, and extra work that I was adding on to other obligations. And I think that's entirely fair. I mean, there's this sense of going above and beyond in moments like this that I think is normal, and I think we are called to it. And if it taxes me, that's fine. Every moment that I thought was hard, and there were a few of them, I also thought, well, if it's this hard on me, how hard is it on my friends and colleagues and neighbors and strangers and enemies, even, because that's the whole range of people who have had to deal with this for hundreds of years and have had to bear the sort of crushing weight of oppression and marginalization. Like I can actually do the hard thing here and keep doing it, and know that I get to walk away from it too and go on vacation and it doesn't follow me. And there are people that don't get to do that, as we all know. And so that is the part where, when it's hard and extra, that's the part that I keep resorting to. That's the thing that keeps helping me push through even the hard moments. This question, though, about how do you not drive your own car into somebody else's car, disable both of them while you're actually watching the burning truck? That is a question. I don't know. Obviously, I'm really bad at that because I'm the guy who actually disabled his car. And metaphorically speaking, I think there are moments where I do that. Metaphorically speaking, I think there are moments where my job is to work on, you know, X, Y, and Z responsibilities, and I can't keep my head out of U.S. politics. I'm talking about pre-pandemic. I'm talking about demonstrations and protests and riots, racial injustice. We all need to get, I think, better at that is one thing. Another thing to consider, though, is how do you use the calling, the training that you have, Caroline, as an architect, and turn that toward the good of not just the common good, but specifically the good of the communities that have to bear the crushing weight of oppression. Right? If this is a calling that you feel brought home to you right now, how do you do that with architecture? I have ideas about that because I do urban studies and urban planning and urban policy. We intersect with architecture all the time. I have students who are asking the same question. So it feels to me like a field where I could speak to that, but that's just an example. We might all be feeling that. But for some of us, it's also, maybe we change our vocation. To be honest, I'm not suggesting, Caroline, that you drop architecture, but what I'm saying is, for some people, the right response is, I thought I was going to do X, and now these dynamics unfolding around me suggest Y. That doesn't negate what Lewis says about, if X was worthwhile, it still is, just because you're not called to it anymore. And we're always being forced to reconsider our callings, right? Same thing that I opened with, that I had been put in a position to have to do that 5 times over 15 months. I wasn't expecting to have to do that at all. And I had to think that through. If I had left to do one of those other things, at least 2 or 3 of them would have intersected more directly with responding to the situation around us, with the pandemic and with racial injustice. Would that have made being a professor illegitimate or unworthy? No. And that's what I hear Lewis emphasizing, is it's still worthy. What I thankfully don't hear Lewis saying is, you should definitely walk away from it. I'm sorry, you should definitely not consider walking away from it, right? Definitely keep up the status quo. Definitely keep doing that same thing. I understand, Caroline, why you see the sort of elevation of the normal, glorification of the normal. I'm not sure I see it quite as much, but I see that I and others are inclined to read it that way at first glance.
think MD. I really appreciate that. And I also, in saying that, I think that like I've seen that more kind of, was not a religious studies major, but just, I don't know, like I've appreciated kind of seeing like the changing tide in that reading of some,
Sure.
like, some of Lewis's work. Seeing it like, respond maybe a little bit more critically to our current cultural moment rather than just like being taken as a trope that we never question. So I was saying that's like a positive, like I haven't seen a lot of people do that. Yeah. But I think maybe
and I tended to do that too.
Yeah. Sometimes I'm like, this is just Bible. We're just not gonna mess with it. It's not. And I need to probably be more critical of it.
All right, Mary Dryden, we're going to give you the last question, MD.
This isn't formulated super well, so bear with me. But I am just wondering, we've been talking about COVID, talking about recent protests, and we've also been talking about the election, and I'm just not sure that this metaphor of seeing a burning truck and this metaphor of normal really fits, at least in my mind, with the recent protests after George Floyd's murder. I think that I think maybe in that sense, the normal or the driving is kind of white ignorance or white privilege and white comfort. And then maybe the burning truck is the knowledge of, or the abnormal is the knowledge of racial injustice. And so personally, I don't really see it as an option to stick to normal if we're saying that normal is leading a white life where we don't have to recognize those things. So I guess that example of the burning truck sort of stands apart for me from those others, because I think that, like, I think as Christians and as people who look forward to a day in heaven when all nations and all peoples are together under one God, I think that it is just impossible for us to even consider continuing to drive and continuing to ignore it. So I think I'm sort of butting up a little bit against this metaphor and also trying to look a little bit deeper into the definitions that we have of what normal is.
That's a good question. What's your major?
Spanish.
Spanish. That was my major, actually, as an undergrad, which means essentially you're majoring in Spanish literature, right? Once you get past a certain point. Latin American short stories were my favorite part of that. And so I have a sort of twisted take on normal that would be really comfortable with Borges, for example. What I hear you saying, though, is exactly why I asked one if it was Spanish or where somebody literary element of write that paper that I was going to write. This is why I haven't written that essay, right? What you put your finger on is exactly why I haven't written. You're actually the only ones who've heard this part about the burning truck, other than my wife. Then there was one other person I shared it with. I said, I'm looking to write this essay. What would you say? And he gave me some help. What I want to avoid is the normalization of sort of ignoring the centering of whiteness or the privilege of ignoring racial injustice or something like that. And you're right that one way to write that essay or one way to think about that moment is the burning truck isn't just what happened with the election, or it's not just that the Congress is entirely failing us to keeping the president accountable or something like that. There's another way to read it that, especially with me driving down that road, normal is that burning truck is actually other people suffering because of what's unfolding around us. And my wanting to keep driving without crashing is my wanting to remain more ignorant or inactive about it. So I understand what you're saying. That's why I didn't write the essay, because I don't know how to say it yet without sounding that way. And you've put your finger on something really difficult and important. What I would say in addition to respond to that is, I'm also thinking about people whose callings are as parents, as caretakers for elderly parents who are declining, whose calling is to work 3 jobs so their child can go to college or something like that. And they have that all, even though it's not necessarily achieved calling in sociological terms, it's more or less ascribed calling. It's something that's given rather than chosen, right? You don't choose to have an ill parent. You don't choose to have to work 3 jobs. You're given those things. And yet we need to give that the dignity of calling it vocation or calling. And we need to understand when those people who are facing those circumstances, whatever they are, because there's a myriad of those circumstances, when they have to keep their eye on the ball and make sure the baby gets fed at 3 a.m, when they have to keep their eye on the ball and be at their parents' bedside while they're dying, even though this difficult thing is unfolding around them in a country. And there's a sense in which I want to make sure we have room for seeing the burning truck and also honoring those existing commitments or callings, the web of relationships that we're already in and roles and responsibilities that we already have and we shouldn't neglect, without glorifying the normal, without ignoring the injustices unfolding around us. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's super hard. It's a great question. It's a great question, and it's really difficult one to get around. And that may be why I never get to write the essay.
Well, maybe you've gotten a little closer thanks to this conversation. So we'll look forward to it. And you have a whole host of editors here who are happy to engage with you. And we have some great comments coming in. And Max is going to do show and tell. Part of our cafe nights has been just to find out what's in the back of somebody's closet or whatever. So Max, what have you got for us? And then we'll let the comments roll and we'll give Noah one last word as we go tonight. But what you got going, Max?
So I brought one of my running shoes for show and tell. I've been running a ton while we've been quarantined. I've had more time for it now than probably any other time in my life. And it's been one of those small things that's just been really good to stick to while everything else is very up in the air. I find it very grounding. And I think particularly being like outside in nature, trees and sunlight is a place where I really see God and I really feel his presence, and just has been such a nice thing for me. And also in the past month or so, there have been some really great funds of people trying to find ways for people to donate to social justice movements right now without actually spending money, where running clubs will have people send in miles that they've run, and then they'll match every mile with $1 and give to different bail funds and stuff like that. I don't know of any going right now, but if anyone does run, keep an eye out for those. Those are a really great way to contribute to the movement right now. So yeah, that's my show and tell.
Well done. Bravo. Well, and I think what we could do too, because we have on the Theological Horizons website, we have the Cafe Nights page. So maybe we can, Caroline Carr, you and I can collect some ideas from the group about, ways that you're addressing needs right now, responding, all the stuff about fires and driving and running to the fire, away from the fire.
This made me think about how I was at a protest recently in Charlottesville where we literally purposely just stopped traffic at 5 p.m. Like the purpose of you don't get to drive your car was the literal purpose of the protest. That just came to my mind. But
yeah, so interesting. It's a lot of seemingly random threads coming together here. So thanks. Well, Noah, we're going to give you the last word, and then I'll take us out with a blessing.
Sure. I think the last word, I'll revisit a point that I didn't spend a lot of time on with regard to what's in that second piece that was sent along in the newsletter, one of the things that helps us, I think, understand how to keep driving our car, that is, doing the things that we are called to do, even if that's going to change to a different vocation, and keep our eye on the burning truck, understanding what's going on with our neighbors and addressing that well, is this sort of idea of subversion, turning a situation around and looking at it from the other side. That is the side of the people who have to die so that that system can go on. And I think that's something we as Christians can endorse, should do, in order to listen well, in order to understand, in order to act smartly. So I would emphasize that as maybe our path forward. That's could be explored more fully in different conversations, because we started with normal and ended with subversion. So we're barely into that, but I'd suggest it to you.
Thank you. Well, thank you for giving us an evening of your vacation. That's amazing. You are a nerdy professor after all. You have found your calling. No, not nerdy at all.
Somebody saw me reading in the pool the other day, and I've been accused of having no fun, but that to me is fun. So
yeah, I know. I'm married to one too, and it's a good time. So, well, next week we're going to have a week off. It's sort of July weekend. So Caroline Carr and I decided we would give you all the night off, but the following week is game night. And Genevieve has already come up with Bible trivia. So start reading your Bibles. You got 2 weeks to sharpen up those skills. But we need some other games to play online on Zoom. So I know you have some talent here. So please reach out, give us your games, and we'll spend an hour having a good time together. So we look forward to seeing you in 2 weeks for more cafe nights.
Yeah.
Okay. Anything else, Caroline Carr?
I think that's it. And just if anybody ever has something you're like, oh, I really want to talk about this during cafe nights, or like even like a favorite professor or somebody you read a blog post from, like let us know and we can invite them to come speak and hang out. So want to talk about what y'all want to talk about. Code names. I'll send them for code names.
Code names.
Awesome.
Well, as we go, may the Lord Christ go with you wherever he may send you. May he guide you through the wilderness, protect you through the storm. May he bring you home rejoicing at the wonders he has shown you. May he bring you home rejoicing once again into our doors. We love y'all. Peace. Thanks, Noah. Thanks for being with us.
Thanks for having me. Really great to be here.
Come back.